I'm Joneen Troup from Camden Haven Community College and I'm the manager there. Okay, why we choose to enter into partnerships with other organisations. We're an RTO, a registered training organisation in a fairly small community. We have a large, fairly good scope of registration, and we have a small number of people to tap into locally for courses, and we'd like to maintain our status as an RTO and have a business venture that doesn't rely on the small community. So a little while back it was a business decision based partly on finances that we needed to grow our business in a different direction from a fee-for-service courses that were offered in our local community. So this is the way that we went. And we're good at vet, we're good at administration, and we have good systems, so it was good use of those resources. Okay, so how do we decide who we're going to partner with? This is a tricky one because it's hard to put into something black and white, because it isn't black and white. So usually we're approached by another organisation. Sometimes we might approach somebody and who would like to use our scope of registration or partner with us. We start fairly informally with discussions and feel each other out and see if we can work on some sort of a trust basis. And then based on a risk assessment and a small trial, we'll then work with a relationship with another organisation, and if things work out, we'll continue into a further relationship. Okay, the risks in partnering. Now, there's risks in partnering in terms of your quality, in terms of your AQF requirements, and there's financial risks. So it's really important to do a risk assessment, decide what your risks are, how much they would impact, how you can minimise those, and what contingencies you'd have in place should something happen and one of the risks come into fruition. So the idea with the risks are really to acknowledge them and try and work with them and be prepared to spend time and money if something does go astray, and use that as a learning process. So probably the highest risks I would consider would be AQF risks, or risks in terms of vet quality. And so you have to make sure you manage those and take full responsibility as the RTO, and be very careful about records, and very careful about your trainer and your venue and the person that you're working with. Okay, just in terms of speaking from experience, some risks or some things that haven't worked out quite perfectly. There is a risk when you enter an agreement that your provider organisation may make some assumptions, or may end up with a different idea at a certain point of time than they started with. We've had a situation where a person that we were in a partnership with continued on the partnership beyond the date of the agreement and was not giving the sort of quality training that he had started off with and we were expecting. And we were in a situation where he was working not under an agreement with us, but there was the expectation of the participants who were involved that they were coming through us as the RTO because that's what they'd been told. So that was a very difficult situation because, legally speaking, we weren't in an agreement. However, ethically speaking, these students had started a course, and it wasn't going to be completed. The trainer wasn't up to scratch, so to speak, and we made the decision in that instance to train those students ourselves for no extra cost. But that was more of an ethical decision, and it did cost us quite a lot of money. So I think probably the lesson from that is to be very clear about the start and end date on the agreements. From that experience on, we didn't ever make an agreement more than 12 months, and to notify the person involved when the agreement has ceased, and maybe even in writing, because it was a grey area and it nearly happened to us twice. So it is worth being very careful if you no longer want someone to continue for whatever reason, to make that very clear that they cannot continue and they cannot use your name, and they must take it off all their documentation and their website and everywhere else, because some things happen and they may not be the quality that you want associated with you as the registered training organisation. Okay, in terms of resources, We as the RTO don't purchase the resources. It's part of our agreement that the provider purchases their resources, but as the RTO you're responsible for the resources and the validation, making sure that they're appropriate and validated. So we usually recommend that resources are purchased, validated, approved resources are purchased. If the provider wants to produce their own resources, then we do our own validation on that and approve them if they're appropriate. But it's up to the provider to actually purchase those or pay for them to be produced. And that is something else that's stated in the agreement. Okay, so what advice would I offer for either the provider or the RTO? First of all, and I should have mentioned when I was talking about risks, the most important piece of advice I could give is to have a really good agreement in place. Be very clear on the agreement and make sure that both parties have looked at everything in the agreement, added or taken away what they want, and have come up with an agreement they're both happy with and are prepared to sign off on and abide by. So that's really important. My other advice is to consider what you're going to do and be prepared to be, from a business sense, on either side of the agreement. So if you're the registered training organisation and you're setting up the fees and the agreement and all the conditions, then consider if you are on the provider's perspective and be prepared to be on that side of the agreement as well. Be prepared to pay those fees, go by those conditions, and behave in an ethical manner, in a business-like but ethical manner, and behave in the way that you would like your partner to behave. And I think if you can lead by example and be a really trustworthy business person, then there's a much bigger chance that the person you're dealing with will also be ethical and a good business person. But always take great care at every step and be very vigilant about what's going on, and keep all your agreements in place, keep all your records in place, be really, really careful with records, but also listen to how you feel about a person and how they react, and don't ignore something feeling not quite right. Chase it up and make a visit and just check that things are going okay, very particularly at the start of an agreement. And then once you've got a trust position in place, you can relax just a little more and put less time into your agreement. But at the initial stages in particular, you need to put time and money and pay a lot of attention to detail into your agreement and to your business relationship. Now, fee structures, once again, that's something that you need to consider in terms of who you're dealing with. We have a fairly low fee structure for community colleges, and if we're dealing with a not-for-profit organisation, a registered training organisation or a training organisation that's not in the community college sector and is a not-for-profit, or if it's perceived to be a higher risk organisation, our fees are higher than the fees we have for community colleges. If we're dealing with a community college that we have a relationship with, our fees are fairly minimal because there's a low risk. We have a fee that's fairly simple in that it's a fee for each unit of competency, with a minimum of slightly more than the cost of one unit of competency. And then sometimes we'll negotiate a fee for a whole qualification, or if there's a particular ethical point of view or some other reason for having a higher or lower fee. For example, there may be an additional cost imposed from resources, then we need to put that in the agreement and agree on it.